Yuval?
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, that's it. תודה. סליחה.
No problem. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be here again. I shared with Steve, some of you didn't see. We are working now with the excavations at Givati, somehow managing to go between the drops, I think. It's the same in Hebrew, I don't know if it's also in English. But I will not be talking about Givati today. I will be speaking about earlier periods, and I decided to concentrate this time on a different part of the city. 2 seconds, I'll get the presentation correctly. Oh. Okay, and where is the button? Here we are. Okay, so if there are questions, it's in the chat, and I'll try to relate to them maybe in the middle, or Julia, you can wave and stop me if I need to address something. Like we spoke last time about Jerusalem, and I spoke about the destruction of the 9th of Av and the rebirthing of Jerusalem in a way in the Babylonian and Persian period. But I want to go this time earlier, and in a sense, to the reasons that Jerusalem became Jerusalem. Okay, there is probably there isn't one reason that made Jerusalem into what it is now in our days, but the beginning of everything is probably kind of located exactly where the place that we're looking now, and this is the Gihon spring. And I will try to show you how this part of the site is really the kind of epicenter of where things began, or at least the way we understand them now. And in a sense also, it became also the political and maybe even more spiritual center, or alternative spiritual center in part of the periods. Water were always essential. When you talk about Jerusalem, this is a picture on the web of the 1948 war, the War of Independence, where the western part of Jerusalem was besieged from around. This is a memory that my mother even shared with me about having, to distribute water. And when Jerusalem expanded in the 1930s, both the Palestinian and the Jewish parts, the British began to bring, the British mandate initiated a program of bringing water from the coastal plain, from the area of Rosh Ha'ain, Petah Tikva, Afek, if you're familiar with, not far away from Tel Aviv. These are the biggest water sources in Israel, except for the sources of the Jordan River. This is the biggest spring in Israel, and so they brought water up from there. This is the 1930s that allowed the city to expand further. And the same story happened earlier and earlier and earlier. The city begins next to the water, and at one point technology and the number of people pushes things over, and then the city expands, and there are better and more sophisticated solutions to bring water. But the beginning has to be located by the spring. So when I'm going to talk about the spring, fine, but I'm not a geologist, okay? So you don't expect that the conversation will be about how the water were gathered there and so on. I'm going to talk about actually in the background all the time about the size and the nature of the city, where is it its ancient core, why and when did it become such a political kind of epicenter. So this is a slide taken from the presentation that I shared with you last time, and we talked about these subjects. We are going to talk about the same subjects, only to focus on different location and to follow some other excavations. In this case, not mine specifically. Here is some information. Okay, I said I'm not a geologist, but I'll give you some of the information. The map is in Hebrew, but the description is in English, and you can see the amount of water. I don't know even if I know how to say it in English. 6 million cubic water, meters of water. This is a huge amount, and it's stable, and it flows throughout the year. It has this story of kind of coming up of the earth every now and then. So it's not dropping water all the time, but every time the underground reservoir is getting filled, then it pours over, and the spring is like flooding the area next to it. But this happens when the spring was not completely natural, it happened a few times a day. And so it was always a reliable, stable source of water that allowed not 10, I don't know, herds people and so on to gather around, but really allowed the city to develop around. And with this understanding, you realize that since this is the most unique spring in the highlands of Jerusalem, and even if you want Judea and Samaria, then it makes sense why were people drawn to this place already if we go back to the beginning of civilizations. And think also of water as a source of life. Try to imagine people that are walking there 5,000 years ago when urbanism began. And it's not just about, oh, we can manipulate the water here. It probably looked for them just as it probably looks to us, but we are more kind of logic in a way that we express. When they saw it as a source of life, really a source of life. Okay, I mean, as something that the gods are giving to them, or the actual gods, and so on. So it's not just about I can manipulate it. It's also, this is a very spiritual place to be at. Okay, and it begins as a point of meeting with the gods or whatever they felt, and it ends up as a place of worship or a place of in Christianity and in Judaism, we speak about baptizing or tvila b'mikveh. All of these things tell you that going into the water, coming to the water, were always looked at as holy. It has its sources in the beginning of humanities, probably. Okay, so this is what you have to imagine when you think about a spring like that located in the highlands and flowing and flowing and flowing constantly with water. I think I spoke about it, but I'm not sure everybody were with me in the last meeting. And anyway, this is like behind the agenda. The story of Jerusalem, the big debates in the last 10 years is in trying to realize where exactly did the city begin? Did it begin, like I just said, by the spring? Or did it begin like any other city in the Near East at a higher place? Like if you go to Chatzor or Megiddo or Lachish, all of these biblical sites, it's always the hill that is occupied, and then they find a way to get to the water. Israel Finkelstein, the Lifshitz, and Ido Koch, who claim that the actual ancient mound of Jerusalem is hiding below Temple Mount, or was hiding and destroyed by Temple Mount, are saying two things. First, let's look at other cities and then understand Jerusalem like the other cities. So I compared it already to Megiddo and Chatzor. And the second thing they say is that Temple Mount was always a place that or is still a place that we cannot excavate. So we don't really know anything about it archaeologically. But we do excavate for 100 and something years at the city of David. So in a sense, we are looking under the lamp for the coin. Okay, we go where we can and we say, that's the center. So the spring was always approachable. People were always working from digging around the spring. And so came to be so positive about thinking that the spring is the source of everything. So these two stories are there. I'll say it now. I tend to agree with the traditional view that the spring is the source of everything. And I don't think that Temple Mount would have become so important if it wasn't for the spring next to it. Okay, then you can choose any other hill around it, around the place. You don't need to come specifically to Temple Mount. So I think they first located themselves by the spring and then said, okay, that's the highest hill next to us. This is where the temple will be, or something like that. But we'll get to it as we go along. A little bit more about the nature of the spring, and it's important because people were aware of these geological kind of characteristics and utilized them for themselves. We're speaking about a karstic phenomenon. Karst mean that when water are touching the rock, which is made of chalk, they dissolve the rock and create underground spaces. If you speak to people like Amos Frumkin, a very interesting person who deals with ancient caves, natural and man-made, all along Israel, he will tell you that actually the entire mountains of Israel are one big kind of system of underground caves made by karstic, made naturally. And we as human are always, we're finding one stalactite cave here and another cave over there, and we think that they are separated, but actually it's all one big system that is created by this phenomenon of the crust. In Jerusalem, these two rock formation, Mizi Ahmar and Mizi Yehudi, you see them tilted, and they bring the water towards where the spring comes out. And all of the systems that we will see today are made of people understanding that there are, I will call it instead of karst, I will now say there are underground rivers below, inside the rock. And you can go there and then expand them and make them approachable for persons to go through, or to divert the water where you want to go, where you want them to go. Okay, so according to, this is taken from Dan Gil. Dan Gil is a very famous geologist who works on Jerusalem specifically. And according to his understanding, what we are seeing here, where the spring is coming out, in a second, I'll make my, here. What we are seeing here, where the spring is coming out, is actually the results of all of these karstic rivers that were manipulated, and then the water were brought out by the people at the spring. Okay, so nature go hand in hand in this case, and the understanding of the rock and its formation and how you can utilize that from very early in time, and you will see it in a second. Okay, so here we see Jerusalem, a kind of a hypothetical reconstruction. There are many things that you can argue about, but let's stay with this idea of Temple Mount, an area that we call the Ophel, and then the ridge of the city of David and the walls that are surrounding it, and then you have the Kidron River here. And the artist who made this reconstruction placed the Gihon spring at this location. And when you see this location, you understand all the good and the bad about the spring that I just mentioned. Because fine, there's a lot of water, and then it's flowing and it's stable and everything is okay, but it's all located downhill within the Kidron, very, very deep and away from the city. So if you build your city really by the spring, then anybody standing in the hills around can throw stones and you're not really defended. And if you decide to move up and kind of protect yourself, then you're leaving the spring vulnerable for, you don't need a lot. All you need is to throw a dead goat into the water and the city is poisoned. Okay, so you can't leave an essence like that vulnerable and open for everybody, but at the same time, you can't really live just by it, because then you are vulnerable for attacks from all around. And that's the story. The water are what attracted people to come there, but the water are located in a very problematic place until, like today, we have engines, so we can take them wherever we want. But think of people that need to somehow control this water without being able to bring them uphill, except for manpower, or donkey powers or something like that. Okay, so this location is exactly the story. Okay, what you will see is attempts to hoard the water and defend them, attempts to approach the water, and finally an attempt to simply take away the water from there and bring them to a kind of a place that is more accessible and more defendable. And that will be the final stage of what we're going to talk about. Except for being a nice picture that shows you again the Kidron. You have the village of Silwan here. This was taken in the 19th century when the first explorers of Jerusalem, and I will speak now a little bit about the history of research, when they came around, ancient Jerusalem for them was located where the city walls are today, the Ottoman city walls. So they were not really aware that the ridge of the city of David is the ancient site. And only Charles Warren, who kind of appreciated the spring and wanted to understand the spring, was the first to reveal all of these underground tunnels and channels that I'm going to share with you in a minute. He was the first to kind of explore them, and then realized that probably if we have to look for the city, we have to look for it here, downhill, and not where the Ottoman walls are. Okay, here you have a map. This is the location of the spring at that time. It calls the Virgin Mary, and this is the location of the pool of Silwan, the pool of Shiloah, Silwan, is actually the outlet of the spring today by the Hezekiah Tunnel, which I'm going to talk a bit more later on, but it's something like 400 meters away and on the other side of the hill. And for people coming to, in the last hundreds of years, this is the source of water. They come to the pool, they don't need to come to the spring, and I'm not even sure that they were aware that there is something taking the way, diverting the water away from here all the way to this point. Okay, so that's a map that shows you the understanding, and the entire city of Jerusalem is located here. Wilson, as I mentioned him, is a very, is a prototype of this steep upper lip of the first British explorers. Neil Silverman wrote about this generation of explorers that they were digging for God and country. They were army people. He was a part of the engineering unit in the British Army. He came into Palestine at the time that it was still under Ottoman rule. He was sent by the army, but he was partly paid by the PEF, Palestine Exploration Fund, which is for science. And his mission was to kind of explore and map the water sources of Jerusalem. So somebody from the British Empire coming into the Ottoman Empire and mapping water sources, and he's an engineer and he's an army person. He's not doing that just for the sake of humanity. He's doing that because World War I is somewhere in the future and will take place in one way or another. But at the same time, he was very, very ambitious in his, let's say, scientific approach, and he was trying to really record, trying to explore, and trying to understand the history of the land at that time. And his books were published, and it's wonderful to read them. There is a description when he crawls inside the Hezekiah Tunnel, the most famous tunnel that he explored, and he's describing how, remember again, the water are coming up every now and again, so that the spring is overflowing every now and then, and he was trying to kind of place himself in a right time to go in. He's taking an oil lamp with him, or a candle. He's taking a notebook and a pencil, and he starts crawling. And in some points, the roof is very low, and according to what he writes, exactly at that moment, the spring went up, not according to his calculation. This is the Middle East. The British can plan whatever they want, but the Middle East does what he wants. And when the water went up, he had to decide what will he save? What will he hold in his hand? The notebook, the pencil, or the oil lamp, in order to have light inside, and what he will hold in his mouth in order to make sure that the mouth is staying, just above the water line, and so on. So this is his description of the conditions that he worked there. But he was able to the first person from the West to document this very long and widening underground tunnel that takes the water from the spring and all the way to the pool. And here you have the map. Silwan Tunnel, I called it here. It's called also Hezekiah Tunnel. I will go into its name eventually as we go into this more and more details. There is a shaft here in orange, and this is called today after his name, Warren Shaft, because he was the first person to discover that. Those who were with me, we went down the shaft. Warren climbed up from the spring and approached inside the city and documented this kind of, you see here, a vertical shaft, and then it becomes like a little bit more like a corridor, and it leads up. And when he documented this shaft, okay, this is the location of the spring. This is a tunnel, a hewn tunnel that takes the water all the way to that point, or took the water all the way to that point. And then there is a vertical shaft, and then you have this corridor that leads you into the city. And he already realized that if there is some kind of an approach that is underground, it means that the city is surrounded by a wall. Okay, he didn't know how to date it. He had no archaeological means at that time in order to date. But he conceptualized the idea that if you are trying to come below ground to the water source, okay, to the spring, it means that something is preventing you from going above slope. And this something, and you have to do it while hiding, okay? And this something something is the wall, okay, that he drew here. He had no idea of a city wall. Today we know of a city wall exactly in that location, but he had no previous knowledge. This is just his assumption that the city has to be fortified, and then an underground water system, an underground system will take you to the water, okay? And this is how he reconstructed it. A corridor, and then a person comes to here, throws a bucket. It's not a bucket, it's a pottery vessel. The water are brought down to here, so they are protected. Probably the spring is locked from the outside, so nobody can approach the spring from here. And the water are located here, and so you can go back home safely with the water, happy to go on with your life. And this was his idea, and that's really the beginning. All of these two water systems, Warren really began the research and saying, okay, that's where we need to look for when we speak about ancient Jerusalem. These are very sophisticated systems. The Silwan tunnel or Hezekiah tunnel is still operating today. So whenever it was hewn, let's say by the days of Hezekiah, 700 BCE, and until today, 2,700 years later, it's working. Okay, so it's very, very sophisticated and very successful. And it cannot be done by a lay person and so on. There has to be a government behind that. There has to be knowledge. There has to be engineers. There has to be somebody who is paying in a way for these persons to come and work and so on. And also the workers themselves. So when you speak about these two systems, you definitely speak about a very developed Jerusalem in a sense. And there is another thing that is important to say here. If the Silwan tunnel is taking, Hezekiah tunnel is taking away the water and bringing them to the pool here, it means that Warren shaft has to be earlier, okay? Because Warren shaft is a system to get to the spring. But once that the water were delivered to here, diverted to here, then there is no need to come back to come to the spring anymore, okay? So whatever this is dating to, sorry, the Warren shaft has to date earlier, okay? And that's an important clue in our understanding on unfolding of the systems that were developed here in order to get to the water. Later on, Conrad Schick, who was another one of the wonderful explorers of Jerusalem. Every person like that is amazing. Julia, if you want, you can ask Shimon Gibson, Professor Shimon Gibson now he's living in the United States, but he's half Israeli, to come and speak about this generation of explorers. They are all big characters, and he's a very, very good expert in these 19th century romantic explorers and the empire fight over Jerusalem. So Schick heard the rumors that there is an inscription inside the tunnel that Warren saw, and this is the inscription that was found there. It describes how the tunnel was hewn by two groups who were working towards each other. It doesn't say the name of Hezekiah, but we have information in the biblical script that says that Hezekiah diverted the water into the city. And so one and one were added, and most people accept the idea today that this inscription was placed there at the time of Hezekiah, and he's the king responsible for diverting the water. So it brings us to 700 BCE. This is a unique inscription, but let's not talk about that. Schick also understood that if you read the Bible, it's not only him, there's another person behind, that there should be another system, that you read about diverting and you read about a system that brings the water very gently in the book of Yashiyahu. How do you say the name in English? The prophet Yeshaya. And when he thought about it,
Prophet Josiah.
Okay, thanks. And this is the curving line of the Hezekiah tunnel, okay, that you saw before. And he kind of suggested that there has to be another system maybe going along the Kidron. And Schick dug shafts into the ground below, inside the Kidron, and found another conduit, bringing the water away, taking the water away from the spring and down the Kidron. This is this conduit here, what is called Channel 2. You see here at its beginning. Then Schick and others went further into to the area of the spring, and you can see here the amount of tunnels and channels. Tunnels meaning that it's all made of inside the rock. Channel is something that you kind of dig or hewn from the surface, and then you place a roof over it. Okay, so this is why I'm using channel and tunnel. But you can see here 7 or 8 different tunnels and channels, except for this thing here, which is the Warren shaft that we'll talk about in a second. And some of them are leading nowhere, like you have here. Some of them are completely ununderstandable, like this thing here. And some of them are going away to the south and so on. And this is incredible. This is complex and it's hard to understand what came before what and why are there so many attempts. Although we know we are humans, there can always be a mistake done by engineers that led nowhere, and then they abandoned one idea and went to the other. For those of you who are afraid of the exam, there is no exam at the end, but the slide is here just so you can make sense if you go over it afterward. These are all the tunnels, the numbers of the tunnels that were given by these first explorers. Because when you say Silwan tunnel or Hezekiah tunnel, you're bringing your interpretation into the names. And when you say tunnel 1, tunnel 2, tunnel 3, you're not saying anything except for numbering and making it easier to go back to the map. So the slide is here, and I kind of highlighted this in yellow because, as I said before, that's the crucial moment. Hezekiah tunnel, or tunnel 8, the official number that it got, is the only one that we know for certain its date. And the date is Hezekiah, or maybe a little bit after Hezekiah, but that's the end of the 7th century BCE. All of these attempts have to be earlier. So when we talk about Jerusalem in the early periods, these things are very crucial for the understanding of these earlier periods. Okay, so the fact that we have a datum line, we know that the water was diverted somewhere at the end of the 8th century, then it gives us an opportunity to unfold earlier moments in Jerusalem history through the understanding of all of these tunnel 1 all the way to tunnel 6 and 7. Tunnel 7 is missing here because it's even more mysterious than the others. And I will not go into all of them, don't worry. But you'll see that I'll try to kind of peel the and to go into the earlier periods as early as we can in relation to the spring. Okay. A little bit more about the history of research after these days of Warren and then Schick and so on. The area was kind of left by itself. Only in the end of the 1970s, beginning of the 1980s, Yigal Shiloh kind of documented all of these installations and also made them approachable for the public. And Yigal Shiloh also climbed the Warren shaft from top to bottom. After his work there and the cleaning of the shaft, it was possible to come and visit. So from somewhere in the 1980s, you can actually visit and go down Warren shaft, and you'll see more. And after him came Roni Reich and Eli Shukun, who worked for many years. This book is also published in English. If you want, I can send you. This is a wonderful book for anybody who wants to understand the history of research and the history of Jerusalem through Roni's understanding. And they worked also a lot around the spring, and I will share a lot of their work. And there are others, but this is like already here and there. This is like not the main expeditions. I think Roni Reich is the last person to really working on a volume. And this is a map that Roni and Eli published that has everything of the spring next to it. This time also architecture and not just the tunnels, the underground tunnels. Okay, everything in blue are the water facilities, the water tunnels. Okay, and if you follow me from the spring, you go here and you go here and you go here. This is the Hezekiah tunnel, the tunnel 8 that takes the water away. And all of these are the other 1 to 7 channels. The hatch line here, all of these lines here are architecture that I will be talking about. And this mustard green is the way the Warren shaft works. And this is where we're going. Like all visitors in the 1980s and 90s, Roni Reich went up and down the shaft, guiding and so on. And it looked, it is incredible, but it's also kind of disturbing. You go through a very, very wide corridor, not easy to climb. Probably today we are using steps, but before that it was probably very slippery. But still, it's very wide. And according, as I said to Dan Gill, what happened here is that the corridor was probably very narrow when it was found by whoever owned it. It was an underground river, karstic river, and then they expanded it and made it into a corridor that you can go through. And you go down, and you go down, and you go down, and you find Roni Reich sitting by the vertical shaft. Okay, this is exactly the location where the corridor becomes a vertical shaft. And according to all explanations until Roni, you come to this point, you throw down the bucket, like you see that Roni is throwing, and you go up with the water back into the city. But what Roni did is try to do that. Okay, he threw down a bucket, and he was trying to see how successful he is with bringing water. He wasn't the first to notice that the corridor is very wide and approachable and easy to walk, or relatively easy to walk, but the vertical shaft is irregular and with many pointing kind of corners of rock is pointing, and like they didn't invest in making it round or square or wide enough to be successful. And they threw the bucket and it comes up, and in most cases in his test, the bucket was left down there and the rope came up without the bucket. And think of that, if you're using a pottery vessel, then the chances are even slimmer because the vertical shaft was never really organized. And Roni said, it's not working. Something in the theory is not working. This is not operational. And he lifted his head up and you see the ladder, and above the ladder, he saw an opening that was blocked at the time. Like he is the one who excavated this opening. And then came to him an idea that what we are seeing here is actually a second stage in a more, I would say, simpler and logic system. And the system is like that, okay? This is the corridor, and this is the shaft, the vertical shaft. The vertical shaft is karstic. It's natural. It's there. It's waiting. It's not, you're not even waiting. It's simply there. And the first people who used the corridor simply expanded the corridor in order to make sure that they can approach the spring. And I will talk about the place where they're walking in a second. And that's how it began, okay? People were walking somewhere here above the head, the level of the head that Roni is sitting, through this opening here and towards the spring in a kind of a relatively flat corridor. At one point, somebody decided to lower the floor of the corridor, and this is the green that you see here. They accidentally, and that's the important thing to say, accidentally hit the head of the shaft, and then they said, oh, okay, we have a shaft here, and it became a problem. According to Roni, this was never operational. This is a moment that this place was left not working. Okay, the shaft was never meant to bring water up to the city. The corridor was meant to do that, and the opening of the shaft kind of disturbed their idea of lowering the floor of the corridor. Okay, where does the corridor takes us? It takes us through here. Okay, if you go for it, this is the place of the vertical shaft. The corridor continues through here and brings us to this location here. And this location, what is written here, rock cut pool. Okay, and this is how Roni and Eli found it. It was filled with earth and stones, and we'll talk about this filling later on towards the end of the presentation. But the amount of finds here hided out a pool that it's hard to show you. The pictures are not very good, but it's deep, and its most chamber brings you to the level of the water from the spring. So if you go back to Roni and Eli's understanding, people went into the corridor, went through here, came to the rock cut pool, and at the same time, tunnels 2 and 3 were cut underground, and they led the water to this location here. So people were coming here to collect water and come back to the city. The spring was diverted into a rock cut pool, and people were able to come from beneath ground to this location. Okay? This is the original moment of the manipulation around the spring, according to Roni Reich and Eli Shukun. Okay? And you can see here Roni standing. This is the place where the water entered the rock cut chamber, and this is where an outlet that is later. I will not go into it, but it was added on a later time. And this is, ignore the tower for a second, we'll come to the tower in a minute, but this is where I'm taking you. This is this rock cut pool, and the approach to it, according to Roni and Eli, originally was underground. So you are defended and then you can go back into the city. You have here another corridor that is protected by both sides, but this corridor is above ground, and you have here a tower. And this is where we're going next, because in their plan, it wasn't just the rock cut pool, it was also the defending tower, and this another amazing large corridor that kind of protected people going down towards the spring. Roni and Eli were the first, actually there was somebody who saw it before, but they never really understood. Roni and Eli were the first to excavate by the spring in such a massive manner and see the size of the stones that were used there in order to build the corridor and the tower. These are massive boulders that had to be somehow brought over there and placed one on top of the other, except for the days of Herod, which brings us to what, 4 BCE. This is the biggest building project in Jerusalem before that. Okay, so this is massive. This is monumental. And this, according to Roni and Eli, is all going together. Okay, this is the preservation of the wall of this corridor. According to their understanding, there is a corridor here above ground that brought people down. So there's a system below ground and there's a system above ground. And according to their understanding, both systems were dating to the same period. And I'm coming to the period in a second. Okay, a corridor in the middle, a wall protecting it from one side and a wall protecting it from the other side. And this is another reconstruction, this time by Joe Ziel and his team, who excavated there later, of a corridor and then a protecting tower around the pool and so on. All of this very, very massive. And when does it date to? Just a second, I need to move things away. According to Roni and Eli, it connects the first time Jerusalem becomes an urban center, and this is the Middle Bronze Age. The Middle Bronze Age, we're placing us around 1900 BC, 1800 BC, somewhere around there. Canaanite culture, it's a culture of royal cities. There is no one state that is called Judah or Israel or whatever. It's all Megiddo and its surroundings, Chatzor and its surroundings, Ashkelon and its surroundings, and Jerusalem and its surroundings. And the big construction here by the pool convinced Roni and Eli to say that we can see the power of the might of the Canaanite kings at this year's 1800, 1900 BCE. And so it stood until something like 2 or 3 years ago. Oops, sorry. And what happened, it's already 5 years, I think, to 2015 it was published. What happened then is that Joe Ziel said, we are all kind of dating it on colonial pottery and we're not very certain. Let's try and date all of this construction on using C14, which is an independent clock that checks the date of organic material independently of archaeology. There isn't a lot there to try and find organic material, but what they did, Joe Ziel together with the Weizmann team, is that they went into the base of the wall. This is the wall, maybe I'll go here. This is this wall here. Here you see it is reconstructed, the eastern wall of the tower. They went underneath it, and took from the base olive pits and charcoals and bones, things that you can date by C14. And according to this understanding is that, like, if you have there an olive pit that says the year 1000 BCE, then the tower has to be 1000 BCE or later in time, closer to us. Okay, so the material gives the earliest date possible for the construction of the tower. And they collected a lot of material. They found their layer and another layer and so on. And if you ask Joe Ziel, he was thinking, he was very convinced that this is Middle Bronze, like we are all convinced, and he was thinking, can I say that it's 1800 BC, a little bit earlier? It will place Jerusalem in the scenario of understanding urbanism in this epoch, and the connection with Egypt and so on. But what he did really find, and you can see it here, is this latest date. And this places us at 800 BCE, the end of the 9th century BCE, instead of placing us here, okay? So, according to this find, there is Middle Bronze here, okay? These dates are coming from the Middle Bronze, but these dates are of layers that are going underneath the tower. So people were using the spring in this era, but it's not connected to the fortifications. The fortifications are 9th century BC. And this date is kind of making a noise in two directions. First, it places a big burden on people trying to understand the Middle Bronze entity of Jerusalem. And on the other side, it adds a lot of information to an era that we knew nothing about. And this is the 9th century BC. If I give you the names of the kings of Judah, so you have a lineup, David is supposed to be 1000 BCE, Solomon a little bit after him, the 10th century BCE. The 9th century BCE, we are already after the days the monarchy was divided between Israel and Judah, and if you come to this very, very exact date, I'll give you a clue about it. When you have a reading like that, C14 is never exact, it never gives a very specific year. So it shows a range of possibilities. Okay, that's a range of possibilities. Sometimes the range is very wide and it's not really helping. But this very specific date is unbelievable. It's very narrow, it's very sharp, and brings us to the days of King Joash, the end of the 9th century BC, an era, I'll say a few words about it later on. So there are, like, it's disturbing or contributing, depends on your point of view, from two directions. There are two possibilities here that cannot be ruled out, and still like that, 6 or 7 years after this finding, it's debatable. The first option is that somebody did build this in the Middle Bronze Age, and it was in use in the Middle Bronze Age, and then it kind of fell out of use, became a little bit, part of it collapsed, and it was repaired or rebuilt in the 9th century BC. That's one option. Middle Bronze Age still has to be proven. The second option is that it was built in the 9th century BC, and there's nothing here from the Middle Bronze Age. And it's not just the tower, okay? It all goes together. If it's the tower, it's the upper corridor. If it's the upper corridor, it's also the Warren shaft system. And if it's that, it's also the rock cut pool. So everything is either or, in a sense. And you cannot take just one option you cannot take just one component of the story. I'll say a few words about the Middle Bronze, and then we'll go in the 9th century, and maybe also I'll after the Middle Bronze, I'll make a small break and I'll relate to some of the questions maybe. This is another area further south of the spring, excavated by Shiloh in the 1970s and 80s. It's called Area E. Today it's a beautiful grass lawn area, almost like a park. In the excavations here, Shiloh unearthed remains from the Middle Bronze Age. And he related them to others. Shiloh didn't know about the Spring Tower and so on, but he kind of related it to the same era as the Spring Tower. And he also found here a wall that he hoped, he understood it as a city wall. Shiloh wasn't really able to date things clear. In a work that I conducted there, together with the same Weitzman team that Joe Ziel dated the tower with, we decided to kind of C14 date the entire sequence of what Shiloh excavated in this area. Again, absolute chronology, and to make all of these kind of archaeological assumptions, to put them aside and bring kind of hard sciences into the work of Jerusalem. So these are the stratums that Shiloh counted, and these are the two stratums of the Middle Bronze Age. We dated more, but I was on the Middle Bronze Age. What we realized, and you can see here, it's very micro archaeology. We work there with teams of 6 or 7 students every time from a different university. We collected as much organic material as we can from very clear contexts, Stratum 18, Stratum 17. We need to go into the details, but you can see here that we have many dates. It's not just 1 or 2 dates like we're able to get from the tower. And all of that into this big chart that Julia, you said about, Julia spoke about bringing new stuff. This is an article that we just sent to, it's not even published. We hope that it will be accepted soon, and it will be published in 2 or 3 months from now. It has many dates and it has many uncertainties. Don't go into that. We were able to say that Jerusalem of the Middle Bronze Age can be divided into 5 phases. And these are the dates from the Spring Tower, from below the Spring Tower, which means that the spring was in use during the 19th and 18th century, BCE, of course, and also the city was occupied at that time, and it's all prior to it being fortified, the spring or the city itself. So we can say for certain that we have occupation, and it's not, it's not just 1 or 2 persons, but there is something there around the spring, but it's still not the fortified city. The fortified city will bring us to the end of the 18th century BCE, and the Spring Tower itself, I'm not sure about. If it is there, then it's really almost the 16th century BCE. Okay, so the Spring Tower is not alone anymore with the Middle Bronze, but the Middle Bronze is not a period of probably of fortifications. And now we can go back to the 9th century. I will make a small break just to breathe, and I'll read some of the comments, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Yuval, so as you drink water, I was brave enough to answer some of the questions. And then the last question I did not answer because you said that you will be answering. So you're welcome to look at my answers, and if I'm not correct, so please feel free to correct me. And of course, answer the last one.
The last one is
before the accidental discovery
what was the motive for lowering the floor of the corridor? Okay, this is the weak link in the Ronnie Reich's explanations. Why would they bother to lower the floor if they didn't know that there is a shaft there? And I'm coming to it. So it's a question that it's a good question because it leads me to the next slide in a second, in a sense. Okay, so I will go over them afterward, or if somebody's not satisfied with the answer. It's a lot to read, and I'm not concentrated enough. Okay. So we are going back to the slides. Where is it? Here. Okay. We saw a Middle Bronze city, probably not fortified, maybe fortified in its later periods, and not so much in its earlier periods. And then we see the 9th century, which was a big surprise. It was a big shock. Nobody really expected to see anything from the 9th century. But as always, if you go back to previous publications, you will see that there were already noises saying 9th century, but it never was so fundamental and so basic that we kind of ignored it. And then when the results came, then you say, but there is also that, and it makes sense. So I will show you how it makes sense, but we're going really also to the story of the shaft, okay? And that's exactly the question that I was asked. This is the floor, walking down the corridor, very happy with their life. Why would they lower the floor level to that direction just for the sake of lowering it? So first of all, maybe we don't know. Maybe it is really an accident. But there are others who are saying that the story here is that they knew about the shaft. This is Avi Faust from Bar-Ilan University, Alon de Groot. And why are they saying that? They're saying that because if you look at the story, okay, here is the corridor, and here is the vertical shaft, and here is the spring, and there is this tunnel here. And when you look at the tunnel here, you see that whoever hewn it in the rock, when he was working with the chisels, when they were working with the chisels, sorry, they were working from the bottom of the shaft towards the spring. Okay, so in order to do that, they had to go down the shaft and make their way towards the spring. And this means that it wasn't fake. Okay, if there was no reason, no hope to use that, then they would not bother on this effort. This is a big effort to work your way under the rock here and bring yourself towards the spring. It means that you want to bring the water of the spring towards the shaft. And what Alon de Groot and Avi Faust are saying is that we should not abandon the idea that the shaft was used. Maybe it's not the most sophisticated system, and maybe there was a system that worked before and so on, fine. But at one point, they had a problem with the pool maybe, they had a problem with getting to the spring in other way, and they decided to lower the area in order to find an alternative passage to the water, and this is when the shaft was operational. It can be a short epoch because then came the Silwan Hezekiah tunnel and took away the water, and that's the end of the story in that sense. But there is a moment here, and of course the dating is hard. If you're saying that the shaft is Middle Bronze Age, then this can be 12th, 11th, 9th, 10th, 9th century BCE. If you're saying that the entire system is 9th century, then this has to be a little bit afterwards. So we are kind of trying, like the sandwich here is depending on your dating of the original attempts to get to the water. Okay, here, tunnel 7 that I highlighted here is cut from the spring, sorry, from the shaft towards the spring. And that's why they're saying it wasn't a mistake. It was an intentional effort to bring the water to the bottom of the shaft. And of course, it all happens before Siloam tunnel, Hezekiah tunnel is being cut. Okay. These, where I highlighted here, are the walls of the corridor. And these here, oops, sorry, this place here is the wall of the tower. And this is the rock cut pool located by. When Roni and Eli excavated the pool itself, they found it, as I said before, filled with massive stones and a lot of earth. And they dug it out. You can see here in the background, sorry, I'll make sure that my spotlight is working. You can see here in the background, somebody came and built a house inside this rock cut pool, okay? So this is happening close to the end of the 8th century. All of the earth below the floor of this house is the fill that kind of gathered into the pool when it went out of use, or an intentional fill that was brought there in order to level the area and to construct the building. They decided to, Roni and Eli, decided to sift all of this fill because it was sealed by an 8th century floor. They said, everything that we find here it has to be earlier than the 8th century BCE. And much to everybody's delight and their surprise, the fact that they sifted here gave out incredible results. I don't have a picture. I'll speak about the Bula in a second. I don't have a picture of other finds. The other finds are fish bones. Thousands and thousands of fish bones that were found inside this field. Fishes that were brought from the Mediterranean, fishes that were brought from Egypt, fish bones that were brought from the Red Sea, and from sweetwater reservoirs, the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, or other options. Which means that the people of Jerusalem in the 9th century were eating fish. Okay, and there are trade routes that are leading from the coast up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is webbed within the world of the 9th century. Okay, again, this King Joash, and maybe the earlier kings to him, are well webbed into the system, and I will say a word about the system in a second. And the second thing that was found, but this is local, this is not connected to the fish bones, are these bulea. Bulea are pieces of mud that were taken, and somebody is placing a stamp on it in order to make sure that when it's broken, you know that somebody opened up a box or an envelope or papyrus or a door, it can be, or a box, it can be many things that you want to seal. Okay, so you have a stamp, these are not the stamp, and then you stamp it just like we do on a wax seal today. And the stamps are evidence of bureaucracy. But what's incredible here, you know that there is a big collection of buleas that were found by Shiloh. This is from the 586 destruction. Also, we found a number of buleas. They all have writing on them, and they have a very, very sophisticated system of, I published, and I think I talked about it last time, Natan Melech, Eved Melech. He's a servant within the royal, the royal state, or the statehood. He's a statement? No, you don't say a statement, a civil servant, and so on. Here, this is 9th century, there is no writing. It's all pictographical. Okay, so you have a stamp with a drawing of a person lifting up his hands here and so on. You have a stamp here, probably of a person by a boat. You'll see a better boat in a second. These are all stamps that people were using in order to say that's mine, or this cannot be opened, or something like that. But there is no writing system that was developed already. Okay, it's really the first moments of the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet emerging out of the Proto-Canaanite alphabet that was there before. So most of the bureaucratic system was still working on unepigraphic stamps. Okay, and they don't repeat themselves. Each person probably had his own, not each person, people that were important enough had their own stamping. Okay, and if you look at that, you can see the lines here. First of all, also understand the size. I didn't say a word about the size. Okay, each of that is something like this is 2 centimeters. Okay, so you can understand the size of these buleas. And what you have here is a proto-Aeolic capital, an image of a proto-Aeolic capital. These are things that will appear later in Judah. They appear already in the 9th century in Israel, of stone ornamented capitals with these valuts. And you have this idea here on a stamping that somebody held. Okay, so we can say in the 9th century BCE that there is a bureaucratic system already operating in Jerusalem. There are no things like that from earlier periods. There is something a little bit from the Middle Bronze, but it's not as present as this system. But it's not the very mature, sophisticated system that will be there in the 8th, 7th, 6th century BC. So we have a moment here that is in between. Okay, here you have another seal, very Phoenician in its style. You have a griffin, the wing of a griffin or something like that. And here, this is the one that has a boat on it. You can see the boat here and these are the rows of the boat. You have a person standing, and that's the boat itself. Okay. And that's the seal itself. That was like an example of a seal that was found there. The clay, I'm going back to the bulas for a second. The clay was checked by petrography. Petrography gives you a kind of a geological imprint of the place where the clay was collected. These are not things that were sent to Jerusalem from different places. This is all local clay to Jerusalem. So you have here a system of stamping and so on, but it's local. Maybe somebody had signed a contract with somebody and they needed to keep a copy of the contract and sealed somewhere in a library to make sure that if they have an argument, they can go back to the document and read about it. So they're using this stamp seal in order to do that, okay? Or I'm giving you something and I have a box and I don't want it to be opened and I have a sack full of grains and I want to make sure that nobody opens it. I'm using that, okay? But it's all local. It's not international correspondence that we're looking at in this case, okay? It's all very, very local. And the fact that the stamp is found here also tells you that there is somebody holding this stamp and stamping the place inside Jerusalem. Sorry, it's not the only thing that was found there. Okay, so you have the tower dating to the 9th century. You have an immense amount of fish bones telling us that they're getting their diet not just from animals around, but what they're growing, but they are exporting food into the city. You have the bureaucratic activities that were all found within the pool. And these are very small houses that were found by the next generation of excavators after Roni Reich. Josiel and Nachshon that you see here, their names, but the others, Otalu is still working there. Buildings that were built by the corridor. And actually, okay, the house that I just showed you is located here. There, I showed you a few slides ago a house that was built within the pool. There are a number of houses that were found here, and actually, if you take it to everything that was found until today, nobody made a nice drawing of that. But all of this area is built in the 9th century BCE. It's not the way the drawing has of a tower that is projecting out of the city and a corridor that leads you towards it, or an underground passage. That's not a correct image. The correct image is that the tower is within a very heavily built surrounding, and it's not the easiest place to build because it's a very sharp slope and you need to manipulate the rock in order to build buildings here. Some of the rooms, I'll go to them here, are called the rock cut rooms. They are made into the rock, like they build themselves into the rock, and on the floor of these rock cut rooms, there are some installations that are meant for example, here to produce olive oil. Some are more enigmatic, and we don't really know what they are. Maybe to place wooden kind of wood things into slots within the rock. Maybe others. It's not very clear. There is also, it's hard to kind of pinpoint it, but there is a smell. This is me being very careful of cult activities going on there. And I refer you now to the Bible and the annunciation, you say, when somebody is being crowned. The annunciation of the crowning of, I think, Solomon by the spring, and he's being bathed with olive oil by the spring, and there's a procession leading him towards the spring. It may not be a coincidence that we have here buildings that are crowded next to the spring, and they have olive oil production, they have other things, there is a standing stone there. It can be that it's not just about me building my house on the slope because there is no other option. It can be that this entire area is really trying to locate themselves by the spring exactly because of the reasons that I spoke about in the beginning, that the spring is a holy place. And the Bible tells us about Temple Mount, and it being the only holy place. But people were also probably holding cult activities or semi-cult, semi-political activities by the spring, and all of these things are part of it. Jerusalem is not alone at that period. And I will not go into the entire political map, but the 9th century BCE came up with very, very interesting results in a site called Moza. Moza is a site that is coming out of the excavations now. I'm not excavating there, but I can arrange the excavator Shua Kiselevich. She can speak about this place. It's an incredible place, incredible site located something like 6 or 7 kilometers west of Jerusalem, where the road to Jerusalem is curving. Today there is a bridge here, and that's why the place was found. And in the first excavations at Moza, they found all kind of different layers, but the most amazing thing was huge granaries. It feels like you have a royal granary here, collecting wheat and barley and things like that from the fields in the Sorek River, and bringing them into the granaries and then bringing them up to the temple or to the palace. But in a second leg of excavations, Shua Kiselevich and others found a temple. And this temple dates to the 9th century BCE, exactly the period that we spoke about before. It's probably not very different than the temple that was found, that was located in Jerusalem, the same size and so on. This is the plan of the temple. There is not much that we know about it. There is a favisa here with bones that were of sacrificial bones. There is an altar standing in front, and all of these clay figurines, including the faces. And if you are registered to Bar, there is a big argument now. Yossi Garfinkel suggested that this is the face of Yud Hei Vav Hei, Jehovah, and there are others who are saying that he's completely wrong. And it's a face of a god maybe, but it's exactly these local gods that were there at the time. And this tells us that when we speak about Jerusalem, it's not just Jerusalem. And I spoke about the fish bones. If you go further out, I will not start showing slides about that, but you have the city of Gat, an enormous Philistine city. Aaron Meir is excavating there. It reached its zenith in the 9th century BCE and was destroyed by Hazael, king of Damascus, at the end of the 9th century BCE. So when we are thinking about fish bones and where do they come from, it could be that Gat had connections with Ashkelon, that had connection with Egypt, and the fish, the salted fish, of course, were kind of, you know, there was a trade that led to the port at Ashkelon and then traded into the inland and then traded by traders, by people that came from Jerusalem down to Gat and interacted and so on. Okay. So the story of the 9th century is really the biggest turn in the archaeology of Jerusalem in the last, I think, 15 years in understanding when exactly did Jerusalem become a very big city. It's not the way it's drawn here. It's not an isolated tower. It's not away from the city. Actually, if you look at the amount of finds around it and the amount of evidence for elite food, fish bones, and bureaucratic activities, it can even be that the tower is the center of the city. Okay, the tower is not just about protecting the water. The tower becomes the place where the important people are sitting and where people are, you know, the court is working, and then you have to come to the tower to if you have debates and so on. It can be that it's the hub of the city at that time, and of course at the same time protecting the water and facilitating the water for everybody. So in this discussion of where is the core of Jerusalem, I will go, if I have to map this 9th century Jerusalem, something like that. We have clear evidence from the Ophel by Elat Mazar excavations. We have clear evidence from here. There was probably something also on Temple Mount, but I cannot prove it positively. But I would, like, if I may, I would have expanded the orange thing a little bit further to the north to include also Temple Mount. And this city is in connection with entities to the west. Moza may be connected to Jerusalem, maybe a rivaling center at the same time. Gat of the Philistines is the biggest center further to the southwest. Tel Rehov to the north in the Jordan Valley is the next entity to the north of Jerusalem. It's not alone. It's not standing by itself here in the 9th century BCE. And when it's expanded, okay, the next time it expanded westward. But this expansion already happened when the spring became less important because people were able to live away from the spring. And just, let's jump on this slide, it's a little bit too much. And this is taking place probably when the water are diverted. Okay, so the diverting of the water away in this Hezekiah tunnel is, first of all, allowing people to disconnect themselves from the spring. And the second thing that it does, and this connects you straight to my previous lecture, it allows the city to now live without the spring. The spring is not as important as it was before. It still stays as a center in the 8th century, 7th century, but the destruction of 586 really makes the spring an isolated place that nobody remembers, okay? So the spring is here, the Hezekiah tunnel takes the water here, the pool now is here. When the city is dependent on the spring, it's always here. Then it shifts. You have the Givati expedition, Givati excavations. It shifts westward because there is no need, okay, to be by the spring. We have a different now geographical layout. The pool here, the temple here, the Theopean Valley in the middle, connecting between them. And all the city is shifting westward. The spring becomes kind of a backyard. And then the city really expands westward and forget about the spring, I think, until Charles Warren was brave enough to go through there. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you so much. It was wonderful and overwhelming at the same time. And I'm sure for people who heard this for the first time, it is like way too much to observe. But, you know, I guess if we take all of them together, so we have the perfect knowledge of your presentation, and I'm sure it gave them some taste for the future. So thanks. And there are a few questions which I will appreciate if you'd answer. Actually, the few questions which are towards the end. Yeah. So one question, it's a great one. I never thought of it. And that's iron. I told them that they used iron-made tools to make the tunnels. So the question is, the iron mined and refined and shaped from where? And
it's
how?
a wonderful question. You're welcome to come into the research. We know of the bronze sources. They are in Timna, and we have a source in Jordan and in Cyprus. Iron is much harder to locate. We don't really know the sources of iron, but there are big mines in Hama. It's in Jordan, in the Jordanian side of the Jordan Valley. But iron can also be produced by taking soil in some of the places. So it's not necessarily that there were center of iron mining like there are for bronze mining and so on. The transition between bronze and iron happens in the 9th century BCE. Okay, so this story is happening there, and we know for certain there are many people working on that in Hebrew University and in Art University. We know for certain that the first people who played with iron were bronze craftspersons who kind of tried to place, and at one point it's tilted towards iron, and iron became more popular for use. But it's happening at the same place, at the same time that we talked about. And it's probably not a coincidence.
But we don't know where does the iron come from.
No, we are not as positive as we are. The story of the bronze is easier.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Now, the question is, what is your opinion on the argument between Israel Finkelstein and Joseph Garfinkel on David and his kingdom? Well, this is something you can write a library about, but if you want to summarize in a paragraph.
All you have to do is look at I kind of shedded light on a specific century, which meant that another century was left by itself, empty. And that's the 10th century, okay? I spoke so much about the 9th century, and I didn't say a word about the 10th century, which tells you exactly what my opinion is. We don't really know anything. There is something in Jerusalem in the 10th century BCE, and Caiapha is a very important site, but Caiapha is not connected to Jerusalem because Jerusalem is not big enough to be controlling and so on. Yossi is using the biblical text here without okay, so there is a glass that is half full now, but it left and half glass empty, and that's the 10th century BCE.
Okay, so just to make sure that we understand, the answer is that Professor Gadot agrees with Finkelstein and does not agree with Yossi Garfinkel.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Now, what was found? I'm not sure I understand the question.
I got it.
Oh, what was found in the rubble from Arab construction on Temple Mount?
Yeah, I'll just say the Waqf in the last, what was it, in the 90s, they built a mosque, and underneath it, they dug illegally into the rubble.
That's what it meant. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are many finds there for many periods. The thing is that we don't really understand how the fill got there in the first place. Is this really a fill that was brought there by Herod? Is this really part of the ancient tale? Or is it something that was even brought there in the 10th century CE by the constructors of the Abbasid kings? So there are many finds there, but we don't know exactly what they represent. Do they represent something that was on Temple Mount in the Byzantine, Persian, Iron Age, and so on? Or are these finds that were somewhere else in Jerusalem and then brought by Herod or brought by I don't remember the name of the emperor, the Abbasid emperor, and placed on top of Temple Mount and then taken away in the 20th century and placed outside? So it's an important project. The excavations, the illegal building into the Temple Mount is of course completely illegal, but in order to make sure we understand what it means, we need to excavate something that I'll tell you frankly, I hope that we'll never hope, like we have enough troubles, I think, in our life now. We don't somebody
Oh,
digging
yeah,
in
definitely. Yeah, we have way more than enough. Okay. What's the effect of the long-term drought on the spring flow?
The spring is bringing water further away than anybody expected. We don't really know, it's like catchment and so on. But definitely, on a long term, it will have less water. There is a work here now done in Israel, a PhD, on smaller springs in the Judean hills, and the effect of the drought on them. It's not very easy to understand because today we are taking so much of the water, the underground water, how do you say, aquifer, and so we don't really know what was the natural balance at those periods. So it's a very difficult question to answer.
Question. Okay. Well, somebody asked if the tape of the presentation available. The answer is yes, it will be. It will be available on the VFI YouTube channel. Okay, so you will be able to see it in a few days on behalf of Steve. Okay, now I walked. Okay, well, this is just somebody's memory. This is not a question. Well, I think that's it. Guys, any more questions? Anybody who still would like to ask something, say something, add something? All
Professor,
right.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
It's to your presentation, but I was curious with your last related to an Israeli actress that stars as Wonder Woman.
No.
No.
I'm hearing you only partly, and I'm not related to her. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
but I.
Yeah, now I understand. No, Gadot is actually quite an abandoned last name. There is a kibbutz called Gadot, just up north from the Sea of Galilee. Gadot means two banks of a river, let's say. So,
Okay.
no, Gal is, she wished she was a relative of Professor Gadot, but she's not. Okay, now the question is, are Sarel volunteers work on your excavations? Well, not today, but generally speaking.
Hopefully.
Sure.
We're still hoping.
I'll jump in here. If you do VFI plus archaeology, then part is working with Professor Gadot at the City of David at Kivati parking lot. So if you're interested in doing that, let me know. Ilana, I'll put my email on the side. We have trips scheduled for 2021 that we're hoping will go depending on COVID. Just let me know. I'll put my email on the side.
I'll add that it's a 2-week program, and we are delighted to partner with Professor Gadot and Tel Aviv University to make this all happen. And we have one in the spring and one scheduled in the fall of 2021. I expect to lead the first or the second one again, hopefully.
Sure. Okay, Yuval, there is a question which actually it was there before, and I never read it to you, and now I can't really find it. But oh yeah, how to find this map of the Jerusalem water systems?
In my presentation, I can share the presentation. I think I shared with the other group before. So if somebody wants, you can write to me, and or write to you, Julia, and then I'll send it to you.
Great.
And so on.
Or otherwise, as I said, the whole Zoom will be placed on VFI YouTube channel, and then you can download it from there. You can just do a print screen, stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's a question about the funding of the excavations. It's all donations. The government doesn't pay for excavations. It's all donations.
Right.
Yeah.
So, all right. Barry and Carol, you unmuted yourself. Is it was because you wanted to, did you want to say something? You're welcome to do so.
We can't hear you.
Barry, we can't hear you.
We're having a sound issue a second ago. you want to type it?
Maybe they just wanted to say hi.
I don't think they're on net for some reason.
I have one more question, if possible.
Go.
Sure.
What volume of water did an individual have to carry from the channel all the way back up to the surface? What was typical?
First of all, the real answer is I don't know. The way I imagine it is that it's a little bit less romantic. I would go to India in order to imagine these things, and imagine kids that are running up and down until they stop running. I don't think people were able to go up and down this thing. It's very slippery. It's very dangerous. I don't even know, like people sometimes talk about donkeys that carry up and down, but it looks to me close to impossible. I would imagine unfortunate persons that had to do that, and the people just were waiting outside and then getting their water or something like that. But this is pure imagination. Okay, don't take my word on that.
Okay, thank you.
Tov, thank you all. Yuval, toda raba. And I will be delighted to listen to somebody talking about Telmot's excavations. I've been there, but to have a good presentation will be amazing. So I will talk to you later.
Shua is the right person. She's incredible.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, I'll talk to you later, and you will make the match. I know her. She doesn't know me, so you will help me with this.
No problem.
And you're all welcome, including you, Yuval, to join us the day after tomorrow for another presentation about the slichot. It's going to be great. So if you don't do the slichot in a show this year, you're welcome to do it on Zoom with us. So consider that. I will send you a link. תודה רבה.
לילה טוב.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.